Hey guys, so as requested, I'm going to go over my recent lab work. I put up the poll in my story and had about 100 yeses and 0 nos within the first 30 minutes. I figured that was convincing enough. I'm going to try to add some context too, so I printed it out here. And try to add some context to like why I had certain things done and why maybe I didn't have other things done. So I've had tons and tons and tons of lab work. I mean, I don't know, probably hundreds of sets of lab work between blood and different in your analysis and different things. So I kind of know what things are pretty much never skewed. So, you know, I'm not going to spend a lot of money on those. And then other things that I want to watch more carefully, or some things that I had specifically checked this time, especially because of the recent, like, really hard food push. So I'll try to make sure I kind of cover everything in that regard. So this time it was blood, fasted blood work. I am in my cleanup phase right now, and I wanted to see how everything looked before I started to push food back up again, give me an idea of where everything was at. So I had a, let's see, CBC, complete blood count, a complete metabolic panel. There's also lipids. There is, let's see, there's also test, free, and total. There is hemoglobin A1c, thyroid panel that shows free T4, free T3, and reverse T3, DHEA sulfate, cortisol, estradiol, vitamin D, 25 hydroxy, C-reactive protein for so inflammatory marker, and progesterone, fasting insulin levels, ferritin serum, and iron. And that is it. So let's go through it. So first off is the electrolytes, kidney function, so on and so forth, and blood glucose. So of course, with that hard push, stabilizing blood glucose was one of the things that I needed to make sure that I did, of course, before I push anything up again. Right now at home on my home meter, so on the test, I pulled an 89. It depends on when I measure it, like it will fluctuate different times of the morning, but this week, so I had this done Friday, so today's Monday. It's gone even a little bit lower since then. I pulled like an 84 this morning, or an 82, and then postprandial is right around that too. So low 80s is really good for me. I mean, that's a pretty comfortable spot. I really don't go much lower than low 80s unless I'm super, super lean. I'll be in the 70s. If I get low 70s, high 60s, I have hypo symptoms, and everyone's going to be different. Some people can drop a lot lower than that before they have any symptoms, but that's kind of where I fluctuate. My pumps and stuff have improved recently, so that's a good sign in terms of partitioning. So that's where we're at there. Kidney function looks good. Very slight elevation in BUN. I'm 1 point over the range, which is probably just a little bit of dehydration, because based on creatinine, which is 1.08, and the range goes from up to 1.27. So I'm actually a decent ways under the range on creatinine, and my EGFR is 92, which is pretty good. I'm really happy with a 92. Electrolytes are all stable. So sometimes when I'm really overtrained, I'll notice my electrolytes being skewed. So if you guys remember the video I did on spotting stress on lab work, that was one of the things that had to do with adrenal function and aldosterone, right? So you might want to go back and check that out. But those all look good. So this part of it's relatively simple. Kind of move on to liver function. Enzymes were a few points over range, which I'm not that worried about. I had 1 day, let's see. I had 1 day off between the labs. I normally take about 2 days, but I knew I wanted to deload anyhow, so I kind of pushed the training up an extra day. But yeah, I mean, had I taken another day off, these probably would have been completely normal. I mean, they're barely elevated. Now on to my iron levels are normal, 91, which the range goes from 38 to 169, so it's right around the middle. Triglycerides are a 113, which I'm okay with. And I eat a pretty high fat diet. Right now, my diet's a little higher in fat. Now, what's interesting is my HDL is a 35, so that's about as high as mine ever gets. I mean, even when I was younger, I remember my first set of lab work before I had, well, I had a few sets. I remember when I was, I don't know, I was probably 19 or 20, and I had low T, right? And my HDL was literally like 30 something. So this is pretty normal for me, but my LDL is only 90. So, I mean, in reference to ratio wise, it's pretty good. I can get my HDL up to maybe 40 at best if I have like a lot of like monounsaturated fats in the diet, but I mean, it doesn't really go much higher than that. So that's kind of what the lipid panel looks like. Let's see, total cholesterol is a 150. No, 148, yeah, so I'm trying to find it. Yeah, I think that's what it is, somewhere in here. But anywho, this is, so when you look at HDL, it's important to look at HDL to triglyceride ratio too, or HDL to total cholesterol ratio as well. Yeah, I mean, this isn't going to tell you a whole lot. Lipids only tell you so much. A little fuzzy floating around. Lipids only tell you so much. I mean, you really need to see oxidation is going to tell you a little bit more. Now, I actually have I'll show you here. I actually have a slip here, right, for a calcium score CT scan. I have not been able to do it because of all the shutdown. I've called twice and they aren't opening it back up yet. So I'm just kind of waiting on that. I will have that done, and that will show me a little bit more in terms of like arterial health, right? So I will get that checked out. Okay, in the CBC, slight elevation in red blood cells. I mean, very slight, 0.04 over. And about the same with the hemoglobin and hematocrit, just a very slight elevation, just barely over. I float right around in that range. I'll go a little bit under sometimes on labs and sometimes just a little bit over, but I'm normally float right around in that range. I never really go much up or down. I can donate blood. I tend to notice that it's actually a little bit higher when I donate blood, and if anyone's ever heard me talk about that, there is the replenishment of red blood cells, so my assumption there is I do replenish pretty quick, and it causes kind of a rebound. So I tend not to donate unless I absolutely need to. Looking at the rest of the blood counts, no issues. White blood cells are fine. No issues in any big deviations in range on any of the fills or the sites, the different types of red blood cells. Platelets look good. I have one thing I will notice too when I'm overtrained or beat up is I might have lower white blood cell count, and some of those white blood cell counts might be off. And then also I've struggled with deviations in my MCV and RDW, and that's mainly due to B vitamin deficiency. So one of the things I did there was my B vitamins on labs were actually normal or even high, but the assumption was I wasn't getting it into the cell, so I needed elemental lithium. So I take elemental lithium, 10 milligrams a day. It's also good for mood if you're kind of deficient in it. So I take 10 milligrams a day. Now those numbers are normal, so apparently it's working. So let's see. Okay, so some hormones for everyone. Everyone wants to see some juicy stuff. Okay, so testosterone is, now I had this drawn, so I normally, I'm prescribed TRT, so I'm prescribed 150 milligrams a week. Total, I split it into 275 times 2. It's normally Monday and Thursday. This was Friday morning. I actually waited till after I had this to do the shot because I knew if I did it Thursday evening or something, the test would be super high or way over range. So it's actually a 763. So normally it's around 900 or 9, or so. It was just slightly dipped off just because I waited an extra day, essentially. So nothing I'm really worried about there. Free test is good as well. And then Estradiol was a 35.2. Normally it's more like 40-ish and maybe a little bit more, maybe like 45 to 50, which is where I feel I feel fine there. And so obviously if my test was slightly higher, then I would aromatize a little bit more. And so that estradiol is just slightly dipped off the usual because of the lesser test level, right? I had hemoglobin A1c checked. So this is one that I wanted to get checked on here along with the glucose and the insulin because this will kind of trace back blood sugar spikes and stuff throughout the last few months, and I was pushing really hard, right? So I'm at a 5.1, which I'd be happy with maybe slightly under 5. 5.1 is not bad considering, what I was doing previously was really playing into this. So this isn't going to tell me, now that I see my blood glucose is normal and my insulin is good, which I'll talk about, I'm not too worried about the 5.1. It's probably realistically like a 5 point or a 4.8 or something right now. If it were kind of more focused on this time period right now. Since it's not a snapshot in time, it's a longer scope, right? Okay, thyroid, free T4, they're kind of spread out. I wish I could put them all in a row. Free T4 is 1.4, so it's almost high-ish normal, high middle range, low high normal range. TSH 1.5, right where it should be. And where's the other one? I didn't put them on the same page. And then free T3 3.4, and which the range goes up to 4.4, goes 2.0 to 4.4. And then reverse T3 is 15. I could almost like the reverse T3 to be slightly lower. So what starts to happen is, if you guys remember, I also did a video on this too about reverse T3 and free thyroid hormones and kind of what happens when that ratio, when reverse starts to go higher and free isn't quite as high as you want. Some of that T4 to T3 conversion is being robbed in there somewhere. So I'm going to I'll look back and see if maybe nutrient-wise I might be missing something that could be altering that conversion. I mean, the numbers aren't bad, but it's, considering my free hormones are pretty good and TSH is good, so my thyroid's not like, and I should say that I am on thyroid medication. I'm on Armour, so it's a combo med. However, Armour still contains T4, so of course there's still some T4 to T3 conversion going on top of the additional T3 that's in the medication. So yeah, I'll check and see if there's anything there that might kind of enhance that conversion. But I mean, the free hormones are fine. I'm not too worried about that. I don't want them to be low, but I don't need them to be hyper in the top of the range either. I mean, I'm already gonna have to eat enough food to grow, so I really don't want them to be much higher. I don't have any like symptoms of hypothyroid with this, so let's see. Okay, DHEA sulfate. I got this measured as more of an adrenal marker to help just check adrenal function. I've had issues with it before when I had adrenal issues. It's a 298. The range is 138.5 to 475.2. It's a weird range, but I'm right around the center, so I'm happy with that. No issues there. Where is the... Oh, cortisol is right below it. So for me personally, I'm more worried about a low cortisol level just because my history of adrenal insufficiency. So like I mentioned, white blood cell counts and electrolytes and all those things, I'm looking at, am I overtrained? How fresh am I? Obviously, like I check things like HRV, I already check already and monitor my sleep, and then I can just tell how I feel, of course. So I'm at a 13.8. The range for AM cortisol is 6.2 to 19.4. Yeah, one snapshot of blood cortisol isn't telling me the whole day's range, but I can use this as at least a decent gauge along with the other things to see, do I need to investigate cortisol further? Do I need to invest the money to do something like a Dutch test and go in and check, like a 4-point dried urine cortisol? I don't think so. 13.8 is good. It's slightly above mid-range. I'm happy with that. That's a great number for me. It's not high, it's not low, it looks good. That's a good, decent, like, waking response in the morning. And last one on this page is vitamin D 25 hydroxy. So there's a couple different vitamin D tests. The 25 hydroxy version is the one that you want if you're looking at serum levels. Just a tip there. I did have, so the range is 30 to 100 nanograms per milliliter. Now I had my vitamin D was not out of range. It wasn't deficient below 30, but I think it was like 41 or something last time. And I would really like it to be high into the range, and that's where I like to see clients as well. So I supplemented with additional vitamin D. So I'm inside a lot, right? I do have the blinds closed right now because of the glare, but I normally keep them open so I get that sun. And I use my sun lamp as well. And I supplement with vitamin D. Now, I had to increase, so I'm actually supplementing with, not including food sources of vitamin D, I'm already supplementing with 15,000 IUs. So I'm probably closer to 17, 18,000 IUs a day. I'm at 90.2 and the top end's 100. So that's a perfect vitamin D level. I'm very happy with that. That gives me an idea of about how much vitamin D that I need. And now that I'll get a little more sun through the window and stuff, and in my eyes and things in the morning, that'll help some. But that gives me a good idea of what I'm going to need, especially during winter months. All right. Boop. Last page, we have, let's see, last page we have C-reactive protein, do the high sensitivity, and progesterone levels, fasting insulin levels, and ferritin serum. So I can just whip off the ferritin serum. It's 100. My iron is normal, so I mean, those are pretty normal there. I just check that along. I like to check that occasionally. I did have some iron anemia before, so I'm good. Good here. That will actually probably go up slightly, which is fine. It's still in a good range. When I increase food, especially animal proteins, it'll probably go up a little bit, but I mean, it's fine. It has some wiggle room there. C-reactive protein as an inflammatory marker, especially for inflammation within the vessels. I have my level's 0.36, which is good. I mean, like anything from like under 1 or even under 0.5 is pretty good. It's barely traceable. Everything, so they say 1 to 3 is normal on the labs. I really like to see more like 1 or less, especially. It is something that can be released very quickly. So there can be fluctuations if there's something that's causing inflammation. So, I mean, I would consider that. However, 0.36 is great, so I'm happy with that. Progesterone, measuring that because, again, adrenal hormone. I have had low progesterone previously with adrenal insufficiency, so I'm just, just checking. It came on the lab work, so I was, I wanted to look at it anyhow. It's 0.2. Range here in this case for males is 0 to 0.5. I don't want it to be 0. I want there to be a little bit there. Insulin levels, 4.9, which is pretty decent. I mean, I've been lower. I've been a little bit lower than that. I've been, in the 3s. I don't really go any lower than that. If I'm very insulin sensitive or like a very, very low calorie diet, there's less insulin secretion, I'll be a little bit lower. 4.9 is good. I like 5 and under is pretty good, to be completely honest. The range is 2.6 to 24.9. If you're anywhere close to 24.9, it's way too high. There might be contexts where like someone's really pushing food and they're a little bit elevated short term, not too worried about it. But in my situation with reducing calories and carbohydrates and all that good stuff, I wanted to see it normal, right? So it is, and that's good. And that's it. I already mentioned free T3. So that's it, guys. That's the whole kit and caboodle. This is, so anyone that's curious, this is from Life Extension. If anyone's looked around at lab work lately, Private MD, if they were using them, they jacked their prices way up. So Life Extension has some good stuff on there that I like to use anyhow, so I went ahead and used them. This is the, what the heck's it called? This was the Comprehensive Weight Loss Panel. Funny that I'm losing a little bit of weight right now, but yeah, it has all kinds of good stuff on it. You can obviously customize things depending on what you buy. This is what I wanted to have as a base, and then like I mentioned, a few things in here would, if they were way off, that might warrant further investigation into some different lab, some different markers, but everything's good here. Kidney function's good, liver function's good, thyroid function's good. I mentioned slightly correcting that reverse T3 a little bit. Hormones are good. White blood cells, red blood cells, blood sugars, insulin levels, all that, vitamin D, inflammatory markers. I mean, it's all the good stuff is here, and I'm pretty happy with it. So again, labs, and I hope that's useful to you guys. I will, maybe next week or something, I'll do a lab work Q&A, and people can drop some questions if they have their own lab work questions. And yeah, thanks for watching.